Chapter 511. Orissa looked over her shoulder and called for the kids. "Follow me, sweethearts. Don't fall behind." Seeing all 6 kids together, Mary couldn't help the smile spreading across her face. All the kids were beautiful like dolls. Adoration filled Mary's heart just looking at them. They attracted the attention of many others in the hospital. The medical staff were stunned. "Are they sextuplets? How cute. All 6 of them look the same. Why is one of them so dark? But he's beautiful too. Oh my goodness. There are 6 cute babies. They're adorable. Their parents must be so lucky to deliver 6 babies in one go. Wow, there are so many kids. How much money will the parents need for them? Each of them is like a furnace burning money." Orissa was used to the whispers and exclamations. She would hear numerous praises and envious exclamations from passers-by every time she took the kids out. She nodded at every doctor and nurse with a smile as she passed them. A nurse asked boldly, "Are they all your kids?" "Yeah," Orissa admitted. "Sextuplets, or how many are there?" "Sextuplets." Orissa bid the nurse farewell and led the kids to catch up to Benjamin. "She's so lucky." The nurse was so envious. Tim looked up at Orissa. "Miss York said I was her child. Hurry up. Let's not fall behind." Orissa looked over her shoulder and counted the kids, making sure none had fallen behind. Zachary teased, "Mommy, don't worry. Even if you fall behind, we won't. Besides, this is the hospital. We can find you even if we do get lost." "Not funny." Orissa poked Zachary's forehead. Zachary giggled as he dodged. Looking at the kids, Orissa couldn't help the smile playing on her lips. Her gaze was filled with adoration as she looked at them. She ruffled Tim's head and shot him a smile when he met her gaze. "Did you sleep well last night, sweetheart?" Tim shyly looked up at her and nodded. Orissa lovingly ruffled his head. "Hurry up." Benjamin had pushed Mary into the elevator but noticed the rest of the group hadn't reached yet. Orissa looked up at Benjamin and said, "You go first. We'll take the next one. Everyone getting into one elevator is way too packed." Benjamin answered, "It's on the 3rd floor." "Got it." Orissa led the kids to the other elevator. Once all the kids had gotten on, she tapped on the close button. Looking down, she noticed Tim was staring at the control panel with curiosity and confusion. With a pat on his head, she asked gently, "Have you ever gotten on an elevator before, sweetheart?" Tim lowered his head as he shook it. His ears were red from embarrassment. A glint of pity flashed across her eyes at his response. She bent down to pick him up into her arms and started explaining. "The button I pushed earlier was the close button. After everyone has gotten in, you can press it to close the doors. Next, press the button for the level you intend to go to, and it'll activate the elevator. When it reaches your floor, the doors will slide open automatically." Coincidentally, the elevator had reached the 3rd floor, and Orissa continued her explanation. "If this is not your destination, wait until the other passengers get out, then press the close button. Once the elevator starts to move again, wait until you reach your destination to get off. This is the close button, and this is the open button. The button with arrows pointing toward each other is to close the doors while the one pointing in opposite directions is to open them." Orissa saw that all the kids had gotten off the elevator, so she brought Tim out and continued to brief him on the precautions when taking the elevator. "After you pressed the close button and spotted someone wanting to get on, just push the open button. We need to show courtesy to the other passengers. Move to the side to not block the doors." Orissa turned to the side and pointed at the buttons to call the elevator. "These 2 buttons are the up button and down button. One brings you up, and another takes you down. Push the up button if you're going to the upper floors and push the down button if you're heading to the lower floors. Once you press it, you'll have to wait for the elevator to arrive. There is only one elevator in one shaft. For example, if you want to go up, but the elevator is going down, the display will show an arrow pointing down. So you'll head down first before you can go up." Tim was listening intently to her explanation. Chapter 512. The other 5 kids obediently wait on the sides for Orissa to finish explaining the elevator use to Tim. They didn't throw any tantrums or make fun of Tim's ignorance. We would have freaked out and not be as calm as Tim if we were the ones who grew up in a rural town and has never seen an elevator. Orissa glanced at Tim. Can you remember everything, sweetheart? Tim nodded with blushed cheeks. His face was too dark, so his blush wasn't too obvious, but Orissa was well aware of his shyness and patted his head adoringly. With a soft voice, she said, when I took the elevator for the first time, I was scared of others making fun of me, so I got on with someone and watched how they operate it. You'll be familiar with the workings after a few times. Okay, Tim nodded. Orissa continued to carry him and hollered for the other 5 toward the examination room. Grandma and Mr. Graham are over there. Gavin saw Benjamin and Mary were almost at the end of the hallway and told Orissa. Let's hurry over there. She picked up her pace, and the other 5 children ran to keep up with her. Miss York, let me down, please, Tim reminded Orissa. It's fine, I can carry you. She flashed a smile at him. I finally got the chance to carry him, so I want to carry him for a bit longer. She bounced Tim up slightly and tightened her arms around him as she led the other 5 children toward Benjamin. Mommy is really amazing to run even faster than us. Jessie laughed. You're not too slow yourself, Jessie. You're doing great today. Orissa complimented Jessie. Jess's smile grew wider at the compliment. Her eyes curved, her dimples appeared, and her smile was so wide everyone could see her gums. She looked absolutely adorable. Tim was staring at her. Jasper couldn't help but pinch her cheeks. How can you smile so widely when you're missing a tooth? You look ugly. Jessie swiftly covered her mouth and glared at her brother. When your teeth drop, I'll laugh at you too. Orissa laughed at the siblings' banter. When she noticed Tim looking at them, she put him down. Jessie, Jasper, play with Tim too. Jasper nodded and came up to Tim. Tim, we'll go and take the elevator later. I want to accompany Grandma, Tim rejected softly. Grandma is undergoing some checkups, so I can't run around. I mean after Grandma finished her checks. Not now, Jasper explained. Tim contemplated it briefly before nodding his head. Jasper responded with a smile. Jessie came over and clung to Tim's arm. Tim, I want to continue talking to you about Mr. Graham. Jessie peeked at Benjamin, who was on the phone, as she whispered to Tim. What about him? Jasper was curious too. Oliver approached, wanting to listen in too. What secret are you guys talking about? Jessie gestured for them to follow her to the side and pulled Tim along with her. Gavin and Zachary trailed after her too, wanting to listen in. Orissa smiled when she saw all 6 of the kids getting along. She could still hear their conversation clearly even if Jessie was whispering. Benjamin went up to Orissa after his call. What are they doing? Orissa cast him a glance and said, sharing a secret. Benjamin locked his gaze with hers and said, Jessie looks like a girl sometimes, but it's best if you take note. A boy needs to act like a boy. Benjamin didn't like boys acting gentle or showing feminine characteristics. He wanted his boys to all be men. Orissa was having a hard time holding in her laughter. What is with your expression? Benjamin noticed the awkward twitching of her facial muscles and narrowed his eyes at her. Orissa turned around and giggled. Her shoulders were shaking excessively. Benjamin's expression darkened. What is this woman doing? After calming down slightly, she turned back around and answered Benjamin. Okay. Her bright eyes couldn't hide her amusement. Benjamin narrowed his eyes at her and asked, why were you laughing? Orissa shook her head fervently. I wasn't. Did you see me laughing? Benjamin didn't know how to respond to her denial. Chapter 513. After Mary had her blood drawn, Orissa came forward and helped her put pressure on it. Do you feel dizzy, Madam Mary? Orissa was shocked when she saw over a dozen of tubes of blood were taken from Mary. I feel a bit weak. Mary's face had paled slightly, so Orissa didn't dare to help her up yet. Sit down for a bit. I'll get some sodium solution for you. Orissa asked Benjamin to watch Mary for a bit as she prepared some sodium solution for Mary to regain a bit of her energy. Are you okay, Grandma? Tim ran over to Mary and looked up at her with concern in his eyes. Mary forced a weak smile on her face and patted Tim's head. I'm fine, Tim, just feeling a bit weak after having some blood drawn. Orissa came back and fed Mary the sodium solution. Mary, have some. It's sodium solution. It'll help you regain a bit of your energy. Okay. After gulping down the whole cup, Mary felt better. Orissa reached for the empty cup and asked, "Do you feel better?" Mary nodded. "Bring another cup," Benjamin asked Orissa. With a nod, Orissa went to get another cup for Mary. "Sweetheart, you don't need to press on the wound any longer." Orissa took the cotton from Tim's hand after checking Mary's wound wasn't bleeding any longer and threw it into the bin. "Mary, we'll be having breakfast later." Orissa was worried about Mary's condition and figured it would be better to wait a little longer. Okay. Mary didn't want them to worry, so she was very cooperative. "Grandma, does it hurt? I'll blow on it for you." Jessie walked over to Mary's side and blew on her wound. Mary laughed. "No, it doesn't hurt." The nurse was skillful in getting the needle in, so Mary didn't feel much pain. Benjamin brought the kids over. "Let Madam Mary rest." Tim looked at Mary with concern. Orissa patted Tim's head. "Madam Mary just feels a little tired after having her blood taken." "That's normal. Don't worry." Mary was better than some people. Some would even faint. After waiting for 20 minutes, Mary said, "Isa, I want to continue with the other checkups." "Madam Mary, we can do it later after breakfast. There are still a few more left, and it'll be noon by the time we're finished." No rush. Even though everything had been scheduled and Mary would have undergone an examination immediately after she arrived in the examination room, there were still too many tests left. It would take some time to finish all of them. "Let's head up for something to eat and regain our energy." Benjamin's tone was commanding, and it naturally made others obey him. "Let's head up then." Mary glanced at them. "All right." Orissa pushed Mary's wheelchair. "Do you feel dizzy, Mary?" "No, I'm all better now." Mary laughed. Her pallor had improved compared to before. Everyone followed Mary back to her room. Once they arrived, Orissa and Tim served Mary her breakfast. "I can eat on my own. You guys take a break too," Mary said to Orissa. "Isa, why don't you share some of this with me? This is too much for me. I can't finish it all. Why don't we all share it?" Mary offered Gavin and the rest of the kids, but they shook their heads. "Grandma, we're not hungry. Eat up, you have to do more tests later." Mary smiled at the child. She began searching for Benjamin but didn't see him. "Where are the sweethearts, father?" Orissa pointed outside. "He's outside talking." "Dig in, Mary. Just ignore us as we have eaten already." Orissa glanced in Benjamin's direction and saw Ethan talking with him, so she served some oatmeal. "Porridge for Mary. Careful, it's hot." After Mary finished her breakfast, Orissa brought her to undergo the rest of the tests. Benjamin didn't join them as he was occupied with something, so he went to the lounge next door to do his work. Coincidentally, Bradley had come to the hospital and was in charge of watching over the kids, with Sean tagging along with Mary when she went to do the checkups. Benjamin wasn't worried in the slightest. It was already afternoon when Mary finished all her tests. Orissa fed Mary the remaining oatmeal porridge and had her rest for a bit. Feeling exhausted, Mary fell asleep quickly. Chapter 514. Benjamin dropped by to check on everything. Once he saw Mary was asleep, he said, "Let's have lunch. You take the kids with you, and I'll stay here to watch over Mary." Orissa tucked the blanket under Mary's arm. Benjamin frowned at Orissa's refusal. She might still be asleep even after lunch. "Let's go." Orissa was speechless as she looked at the domineering man. "Miss York, go have lunch. I can accompany Grandma by myself." Tim looked at the two adults and offered to stay. "We're all going together," Gavin said. "Bring the kid along. We have doctors here looking after Madam Mary." Benjamin stared at Orissa. Orissa noticed Tim was reluctant to go with them and went to him. "Sweetheart, let's all have lunch, and you can bring some back for Mary." "Tim, let's have lunch together and pack something tasty for Grandma," Zachary urged. "Tim, let's go." Jessie went up to Tim and tugged him outside. "If you're not going, then I'm not going too." Tim looked at her and had no choice but to follow her. Oliver and Jasper giggled. "Jessie is the best." Orissa noticed Tim would follow everything Jessie asked of him. "Learn from your son," Benjamin whispered. Orissa eyed Benjamin with puzzlement. She didn't understand why Tim was so compliant with Jess's demands. Jessie cried when she thought Tim didn't like her during breakfast. They became closer after Tim calmed her down. Orissa finally understood. Not many can handle it when Jessie starts crying, but I can't exactly cry to get Tim to be closer to me. I'm too old for that, and I don't want to lie to Tim. Gavin, Zachary, Oliver, and Jasper were startled too. Jessie has used her trump card. No wonder Tim was following her every word today. Let's go have lunch. Benjamin naturally reached for Orissa's hand and walked out the door without even looking at the kids. Orissa glanced at him and looked over her shoulder. Sweethearts, let's go have lunch. Gavin ran up to her and took her hand looking all happy. Zachary, Oliver, and Jasper also ran toward Orissa and snatched her hand from Benjamin's grip. Aren't you embarrassed to hold Mommy's hand right in front of us, Mr. Graham? Zachary asked. The corner of Benjamin's lips twitched slightly at the jab. When he saw all the kids were holding onto Orissa's hand, he frowned. Orissa's cheeks blushed at their fight. Tim was already waiting with Jessie outside the elevator. Tim, remember what I taught you? Orissa looked at Tim gently. Tim nodded. So what should you do now? She asked. Tim swept a glance at them, then walked toward the call button, and pushed the button with an arrow pointing down. You're amazing, sweetheart. Orissa complimented Tim and led the kids into the elevator. Benjamin wanted to squeeze in, but Sean beat him to it and squeezed past him. Why didn't you invite me to lunch? Sean, Bradley, and Ethan had all gotten into the elevator. Benjamin's expression turned darker. Feeling Benjamin's mood change, Ethan came out of the lift rather unwillingly. Mr. Graham, please get in. Benjamin scoffed at him and glared at Sean. Are you coming? We need to eat and get back here soon, Orissa urged. Benjamin stepped into the elevator and went to her side, sliding his arm around her waist. Orissa wasn't used to being intimate with him in public, so she tried to dodge his arm. Benjamin tightened his grip around her waist and shot her a warning glare. Orissa opened her mouth to say something but shut it without saying anything. Sean noticed Benjamin's actions and merely hit the close button with amusement. Oh, you shouldn't push it, Mr. Bailey. You should have let Tim press it, Jessie admonished Sean urgently. Isn't it the same no matter who presses it? Sean asked with a puzzled look. Chapter 515. No, it's not the same. Tim has to learn how to take the elevator. Gavin coolly reminded Sean. Sean drew back in shock before gazing at the little boy in front of him. It's okay, Mr. Bailey, Tim muttered, feeling somewhat embarrassed. The next second, Sean broke into a smile and opened the elevator door. Come here, Tim, he said as he gently ruffled the boy's hair. Still red in the face, Tim lifted his hand and closed the elevator door. After recalling what Orissa had taught him, he pushed the button for the first floor. When the elevator didn't move, Tim grew nervous once again. Oh, no, have I done something wrong? Orissa, who noticed how flustered her son was, quickly explained, that's it, sweetheart. It takes a while for the elevator to move. True enough, the elevator started descending at that moment, and Tim's eyes lit up. You'll get the hang of it with more practice, Tim. Oliver reassured. Yes, Tim replied, nodding excitedly as his lips curled into a smile. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, Tim. I was the same when I tried it the first time. I was so afraid of making mistakes that I didn't even dare to press the buttons. Jasper piped up with a grin. He went on to share his experiences, and it didn't even matter if Tim commented or not. Benjamin hadn't taken his eyes off Tim, but he was visibly relieved after seeing how well the other children got along with the latter. Sean, Ethan, and Bradley merely smiled at the boy, not wanting to say anything lest it made him feel uncomfortable. The elevator stopped on one of the other floors, except no one else got on when they saw it was already full. You can close the door, Sean urged as he patted Tim's head. Tim shot the doctor a glance before pressing the button to close the door. Once the elevator continued its descent, the joy he felt was beyond measure. Yes, I'm getting better at this. You're amazing, Tim, Zachary exclaimed with a massive smile. Upon hearing that, Tim instantly blushed. Oliver, Jasper, and Jessie then chimed in with their compliments, causing him to turn even redder in the ears. Gavin and the adults, too, beamed with delight but said nothing more. Gazing tenderly at her children, Orissa ushered them out first as soon as the elevator stopped. "Let's go. It's time for lunch," Sean said as he swiftly picked up Tim and Jesse. Ethan carried Jasper and Oliver, while Bradley followed behind with Gavin and Zachary in his arms. Just like that, the 6 children were all safely escorted away. Feeling relaxed, Benjamin looped an arm around Orissa's waist as they brought up the rear. "What about the doctors from Delmore? Aren't they going to eat with us?" the latter suddenly asked. Benjamin furrowed his brows and replied, "It's all right. They'll be eating at the hospital. I didn't even want to invite Sean and the others. Why would I get the other doctors to come along?" Orissa immediately raised her brows. "Should we ask them anyway? We're having lunch on our own," Benjamin insisted as he stared intently back. Realizing he didn't sound too happy, Orissa quickly stopped with her questions. The group decided to go to the restaurant in 3 separate cars, and the children were only too happy to follow Sean, Ethan, and Bradley. Even though Benjamin and Orissa were in the same car, the latter couldn't help but shoot a worried glance at the children. "Come on, get in the car. What are you still looking at?" Benjamin asked while opening the front passenger door for her. "The kids," she mumbled. "The other 5 are familiar with Sean and the guys, but Tim has only just known them. What if he feels out of place?" Sighing, Benjamin pushed her into the car. "The guys will take good care of them." Once Orissa had settled into her seat, Benjamin promptly leaned forward and fastened her seatbelt. Alas, she was so shocked by the sudden closeness that she instinctively pushed herself back into her seat. When Benjamin's musky, masculine scent wafted into her nose, Orissa instantly felt a flush creeping up her face. That, of course, did not escape Benjamin's eyes. In fact, the sight of Orissa blushing was so mesmerizing that his gaze gradually darkened. Unable to control himself any longer, he kissed her. Orissa widened her eyes, completely taken aback. Benjamin merely chuckled and pinched her cheek before closing the door behind him. Naturally, Orissa's heart was racing. She touched the area where she had just gotten kissed, only to feel her cheeks burning even more. Her eyes followed the strapping man as he walked to the driver's seat. Why has he suddenly become so gentle? Benjamin got into the car and raised his brow in amusement when he saw Orissa staring at him. "What's wrong?" he asked, exuding his natural elegance and air of superiority. Chapter 516. Despite her heart thumping loudly, Orissa looked away and pretended to be calm. "You just kissed me again." Benjamin chuckled. "So, can't I kiss you?" Upon hearing the arrogance in his tone, Orissa was rendered speechless. "What the hell? Didn't he say before that he won't be interested in me? Why is he going back on his word now? Is he okay in the head?" With that, she turned and glared at him. After starting the car and meeting Orissa's gaze, Benjamin narrowed his eyes. "What's with that look?" he quipped. "I have a bad feeling about this. I know it can't be anything good." "Why? What kind of look do you think I have, Graham?" Orissa asked, smiling coyly at him. "I'm not thinking of anything in particular. I want to hear what you have to say." "Are you sure you want me to?" Orissa said, eyes glinting with mischief. "Yes," Benjamin answered as he began driving off. "Don't I look like I'm staring at a fool?" Screech. The car suddenly braked, and the inertia sent Orissa lurching forward in her seat and then back sharply. If it weren't for the seatbelt, there was no doubt she'd have crashed through the windscreen. Benjamin gritted his teeth and glared at Orissa. "Are you calling me a fool?" "Oh, this woman. What's wrong with her? In what way do I seem foolish?" Seeing how grim Benjamin was, Orissa carefully stole a glance at him. "You were so confident before when you said you'd never fall for me," she explained. "But now, you've done a 180 and kissed me. Doesn't that make you a fool?" To her surprise, Benjamin couldn't find the words to refute her. Scowling, he stepped on the accelerator and drove off. "I knew I shouldn't have treated her well. Every time I show her some kindness, she never fails to abuse it." Even after arriving at the restaurant, Benjamin was still silently fuming. Orissa sat quietly in the passenger seat, lips pursed as she scrutinized the cold and aloof man beside her. "Well, I wasn't wrong. I was only telling the truth." As soon as the car stopped, Orissa immediately opened the door and got out. Sean, Ethan, and Bradley were already waiting at the entrance with the children. "Mommy, why are you two so slow?" Gavin asked confusedly, knowing full well that his father wasn't a slow driver. Alas, when he saw Benjamin stepping out of the car, he became even more perplexed. "Oh, my, who has made Daddy angry?" Orissa turned to her children and chuckled. Someone's driving skills weren't good, so he got held up. With that, Zachary and his siblings shot Benjamin a funny look, and even Tim couldn't stop staring at the latter. Despite smelling something fishy, Sean and the others kept their opinions to themselves and grinned in silence. "Why are you guys still standing here? Get in," Benjamin bellowed before marching into the restaurant. Orissa curled her lip and beckoned the children to follow. "Come on, sweethearts, let's go have lunch." Without further ado, she placed her hand on their backs and gently guided them forward. The three men, on the other hand, trotted along behind her. Sean and Ethan exchanged glances and began whispering among themselves. "Hey, do you think they argued?" At the same time, Jasper, too, had a question for Orissa. "Mommy, did you and Mr. Graham get into a fight?" "No," Orissa replied as she threw a glance at her child. Unfortunately, that only made Zachary and Gavin even more puzzled. "If you two didn't fight, why did Mr. Graham look so mad?" Oliver chimed in. "He looked so angry and so terrifying." Unsurprisingly, Tim and Jesse had also turned their attention to her. Orissa's gaze swept over the 6 children, then landed on Benjamin. "It's all because he's so petty. I merely said a few words, and he lost his temper," she remarked, intentionally making her voice louder. A stunned silence instantly befell the kids. Upon hearing that, Benjamin pursed his lips and walked back toward Orissa. The latter stared warily at him, not knowing what he was about to do. Benjamin isn't going to make a scene in public, is he? Just as Orissa was wondering how best to defend herself, Benjamin suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her along. The next second, Orissa's jaw fell to the floor as she stared at him in utter disbelief. "Close your mouth, you idiot," Benjamin scolded. Orissa did as instructed, but not before her face contorted with rage. "You're the idiot," she shouted. Thankfully, Benjamin didn't continue bickering with her. The 6 kids, however, looked at the couple incredulously, not knowing what was going on at all. Of course, Sean, Ethan, and Bradley were equally astonished. "My goodness, Benjamin is turning into a simp. Wow, I can't believe Mr. Graham didn't blow his top. Huh, when did Benjamin become so close to boss?" Chapter 517. In the restaurant, many patrons stole glances at Benjamin and Orissa. After all, who wouldn't want to check out a couple of good-looking people? Moreover, the 6 identical kids in tow were so adorable that it made everyone envious. Wow, 6 kids at one go. How lucky of them. I think this is my first time seeing sextuplets. I'm so jealous that they have 6 kids, but I wouldn't dare to have that many. Do you know how much money you have to spend on kids these days? It's so tough. Ha, you'd also need a ton of good fortune to have this many kids. Not everyone can pull off a feat like this. I must say, their mother is awesome." The crowd continued to buzz with excitement, and since Jasper liked to interact with strangers, everyone adored the kids even more. Feeling over the moon, Orissa smiled. When Benjamin saw how happy she was, he, too, had a smile playing on his lips. "Hey, I think you're awesome too," he whispered into Orissa's ear. His warm breath tickled her, sending a tingling sensation racing over her skin. Orissa immediately turned beet red from embarrassment. She ducked away and rubbed her ear, trying her best to relieve the ticklish feeling. "I thought you'd be boasting about how amazing you are," she snapped back at Benjamin. Orissa remembered her first trimester being pretty smooth sailing back when she was pregnant with all 6 kids. However, during the latter part of the pregnancy, her belly had gotten so large that it made everything all the more awkward and cumbersome. In the days when she was about to give birth, she was almost on complete bed rest. It was hard to do anything, and just standing for a few minutes would be enough to make her waist ache terribly. "But I am amazing," Benjamin blurted out with a narcissistic smirk. "How else would you have sextuplets?" Benjamin's eyes bored into Orissa, making the latter's heart flutter when she met his gaze. She hastily looked away, but nothing could hide the blush that had crawled to her neck. Seeing how embarrassed Orissa was, Benjamin beamed with delight. As soon as the group had entered the private room, he promptly got the waiters to serve the dishes. "All right, sweethearts, let's wash our hands before eating," Orissa reminded before ushering the kids out. "Come on, Tim, let's wash our hands," Gavin and Zachary shouted as they pulled him along and called out to their other siblings. Soon, the 6 children were obediently following Orissa to the restroom. "Use the toilets if you need to, sweethearts. Our food will be ready soon. I'm going to pee," Jasper exclaimed as he ran into the restroom with Oliver in tow. As soon as they got out, Gavin told Tim to go next. "Go on, Tim," Zachary urged. "Okay." Tim quickly entered the restroom, except he ended up being in there for so long that it worried Orissa. After a while, she sent Zachary to check on his brother while Jasper and Oliver washed their hands. Zachary went into the restroom with Gavin, only to find Tim seemingly searching for something in the cubicle. "Tim, have you peed?" Zachary asked. Upon hearing that, Tim turned a deep shade of crimson. "I have, but I don't know how to flush the toilet." That elicited a giggle from Zachary, but thankfully, he managed to hold it back. "All you have to do is press this flush button, and the water will come out," he said while demonstrating the process to Tim. "I guess there's still a lot I need to teach Tim in the future." "You can head out and wash your hands, Tim," Gavin chimed in, trying his best to comfort his blushing brother. "In the future, if there's anything you're unsure of, feel free to shout for us. We'll always be here to help you. You don't have to be shy around us." Tim nodded firmly. "Thank you so much. Don't mention it. Besides, we like having you ask us questions. Now, hurry up and get your hands washed. Let's not make mommy worry." Zachary, too, reassured Tim before rushing off to pee. When Orissa saw Tim finally walk out of the restroom, she walked up and hugged him. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "It's nothing," Tim replied, shaking his head. Orissa scrutinized her son for a bit, but instead of probing further, she merely helped to wash his hands. "Jessie, are you done peeing?" she shouted as she dried Tim's hands. "All done, Mommy," Jessie replied, running over to Orissa so she can get her hands washed. "All right, those who are ready can head out first." Chapter 518. "No, we'll wait for Mommy," Jessie answered with an unwavering smile. Oliver, Jasper, and Tim also stood at the door, not wanting to leave without their mother. Orissa couldn't help but smile. When she saw the 2 older children come out of the restroom, she quickly called them over. "Come and wash your hands. We'll do it ourselves, Mommy. Why don't you use the restroom too?" Zachary replied as he and Gavin went to the sink to wash up on their own. "Go on, Mommy. We'll wait for you," Gavin urged. Grinning, Orissa patted their heads and went off to relieve herself. Right then, Benjamin popped into the restroom and saw all 6 kids gathered beside the sink. As it turned out, Gavin and Zachary were teaching Tim how to use the faucet, and the latter bashfully followed their instructions. When he brought his hand under the faucet and saw the water coming out automatically, Tim widened his eyes in amazement. "Wow, how did the water come out?" "It's because there's a sensor inside. Whenever you bring your hand up to the faucet, the sensor will detect it and turn on the water valve, thus letting the water flow out," Zachary patiently explained. "However, the water will only flow for about 10 seconds before it stops. If you haven't finished washing, you'd have to wave your hand in front of the sensor to activate it again." "What are those for, then?" Tim asked as he pointed at the bottles on the sink. This time around, it was Gavin who helped with the explanation. "Those bottles contain liquid hand wash. You use it by squeezing some onto your hands." The next second, he went on to show Tim how to use the hand dryer. "After washing your hands, you can put them under this machine to dry them." Naturally, Tim was blown away by everything. "That's so amazing. We don't have these in our village." Jasper, Oliver, and Jessie stared at their brother, feeling rather sorry for him. "Oh, I'm sure these will show up in the village soon." In the past, the city didn't have such fancy gadgets either. There are always newly developed items popping up, and even I have to figure out how to use them. Zachary reassured. Just then, Benjamin walked up to the kids. Well, have you all washed your hands? The kids immediately turned to look at him, with Tim looking especially red in the face. Benjamin gently tousled the boy's hair. It's okay. You'll get the hang of these things once you've had more practice. Feel free to ask your siblings if you have any questions. Okay, Tim said, nodding sheepishly. Benjamin looked at the kids and turned to Gavin. Gavin, take everyone outside and show Tim around. Let's go, Tim, Gavin exclaimed while pulling him out. After tossing a glance at Benjamin, Zachary proceeded to shepherd the rest of his siblings out. Jasper and Oliver promptly left the restroom, but Jessie stayed on, staring at the cubicle. I want to wait for Mommy. She'll join you guys once she's finished here. Go wait outside for her. Benjamin persisted. My goodness. Why is the youngest one constantly clinging to Arissa? Realizing that her brothers had all left, Jessie took one last look at Benjamin and ran out. When Arissa finally came out of the cubicle, she was shocked to see that the kids were gone and only Benjamin was there. Are you here to use the restroom? She asked. Benjamin merely grunted an acknowledgement as he went straight into the cubicle. Arissa began washing her hands, but it wasn't long before she heard him relieving himself. At that, the corners of her mouth twitched. This man has no shame at all. Can't he wait till I've gone out? With that, she picked up the pace and hastily left the restroom. Meanwhile, Sean, Ethan, and Bradley were playing with the kids and introducing the high-tech products to Tim. Arissa smiled at the sight and turned to the three men. Do you guys know what Benjamin has ordered? Sean shook his head. I'm only here for a free meal. I don't know what he's ordered. I think Mr. Graham was the one who booked this restaurant. I have no clue either, Bradley chimed in with a shrug. Arissa instantly looked at Ethan, who couldn't help but burst out laughing. Okay, I was the one who booked the restaurant, but Mr. Graham personally picked all the dishes himself. Not even I have any idea what he ordered. Left without a choice, Arissa took her seat. I was hoping to order more of the kids' favorite dishes, but I guess I'll have to ask him when he's back. Then, she picked up the menu and started flipping through it. Mommy, I want dessert. Jessie exclaimed as she snuggled up to Arissa. Chapter 519. Arissa looked at her and pinched her nose affectionately. I'll order later because I don't know what your daddy has ordered. Then what are you looking at, Mommy? Jessie tilted her head and looked at her, blinking her eyes in the cutest way. Arissa leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. The fresh smell of milk on the child was especially pleasant. Benjamin came upon the scene and saw the affectionate behavior. Then, he looked at the other children. With the exception of Tim, who was watching Jess's antics with Arissa, the other children were quite used to it. Arissa kissed Jessie, and then she kissed her mother back. The mother and daughter were happily teasing each other. Tim, come and give me a kiss. Seeing Tim staring at them, Arissa called to him affectionately. Tim shook his head and blushed, but no one noticed that because of his dark complexion. Arissa smiled dotingly. Feeling another pair of eyes was on her, she turned around and met Benjamin's gaze. Come and have a seat. Benjamin invited everyone to the table. Come on, let's start eating. Sean called out to the others and brought them over. Ethan and Bradley went over and helped the children get onto their seats. Then, he went to wash his hands. You sit here. Benjamin led Arissa to the table and pulled out the chair for her. Arissa looked at him. I want to sit with Mommy. Jessie quickly booked the seat next to Arissa. She had barely sat down when she noticed Tim. Tim, why don't you sit with Mommy? Tim shook his head. No, it's all right. Jessie laughed joyfully. Tim, you sit next to me, then. Tim looked at Jessie. I'll sit here. Come over here, Tim. Jasper offered his seat to Tim so that the latter could sit with Jessie and their mommy. There's no need. You go ahead. Tim waved his hand. Jasper smiled and went over to lead him. Come on. I'll change seats with you. Do come over here. Arissa called out to her son. Jasper led Tim to the seat next to their sister. As Benjamin went over and carried the child up to set him down on the chair, Tim looked at him. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Benjamin pinched his cheek. Then, he saw that Jasper was not seated properly. He went and put him properly in his seat. Everyone is seated properly now. Jasper glanced at Benjamin. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Benjamin cast him a helpless glance, grunted and went back to his seat beside Orissa. Sean laughed as he looked at the caring way Benjamin was behaving. Benjamin, you are becoming more and more like a father. Benjamin cast him a sidelong glance. Do you mean that I was not like one previously? He snorted. Sean laughed. You were not so caring. Isn't that so, Gavin? Gavin looked up at Benjamin and nodded. Seeing that, Benjamin twitched his lips. Orissa looked at him and agreed with Sean. Previously, you were nothing close to being fatherly. Benjamin glared at her. Orissa shifted her eyes from him onto the children. When the soup arrived, Ethan and Bradley helped to serve the younger children. Sweethearts, be careful, the soup is hot, so drink it slowly. Orissa leaned forward, watching out for the children. Yes, Mommy, Gavin nodded. The other 5 young siblings responded in unison. Yes, Mommy, yes, Miss York. Orissa watched them with a smile on her face. Only when everyone received a serving of the soup, did Benjamin give the signal for them to start eating. Tim sat there and did not move when he saw the adults had not eaten yet. Orissa observed Tim for a few moments. Sweetheart, go ahead. Okay, the child responded. Come on, go ahead. She stretched out her hand and stroked his head, speaking gently. Tim lowered his head and started drinking the soup. Be careful, it's hot. Orissa alerted him again. When he nodded, she repeated her words to her other children. Don't just think about them. You should have your soup too. Benjamin turned to her and told her in a low voice. Chapter 520. Orissa was speechless. How about you? Benjamin raised his eyebrows and served her some wild mushrooms and chicken. Come, eat something. Orissa saw that there was no chicken or wild mushroom in his bowl at all and she felt moved. Don't you eat these. I'll just drink the soup. Benjamin started having his soup. He drank the soup very slowly. His movements were very elegant and graceful. She could not help but stare at him. As Benjamin's almond-shaped eyes blinked and turned in her direction, Orissa quickly looked away. Benjamin's gaze remained on her for a while and she turned red, her delicate lips parted slightly. Sean, Ethan and Bradley noticed that something was going on in the way they acted and they watched curiously. Benjamin just threw them a warning look. They got the message and looked down to drink their soup, pretending they had not noticed anything. Tim looked at the wild mushrooms in his bowl. It was something he had not eaten before and he did not know what they were. He looked to his right and left. Seeing everyone else eating it, he took a small bite and found it to be chewy. Tim, do you like wild mushrooms? I can give you mine. Jessie spooned the wild mushrooms from her bowl and put them in his. You won't have any after giving them to me. Tim looked at her. It's all right. I ate one just now. Do you like it? Facing Jess's starry-eyed gaze, Tim nodded. Yeah, it tastes good. The other children followed suit, each giving Tim their share of wild mushrooms. Thank you, I can help myself. Tim was surprised by the affection they showed him. If you like it, there is more over here. Orissa spooned one for Tim, smiling at her son. Thank you, Miss York. You guys please continue eating. Tim thanked them politely. Orissa stroked the child's head affectionately. Eat whatever you like. Do not feel shy. Tim nodded. Orissa looked at her son with eyes full of affection, as if she could not take her eyes off him. Stop staring at him. He wouldn't dare to eat. Benjamin reminded her. This woman is paying the child too much attention. Orissa looked at the children and then looked back at him. What have you ordered? You'll see when they bring the dishes. Benjamin replied simply. Orissa pursed her lips and then asked again. Have you asked someone to prepare food for Madame Mary? Yes, mushroom soup. Benjamin returned her gaze. Orissa was pleased. Mary was not a big eater and soup was just perfect for her. How about dessert? No, Benjamin frowned. After some hesitation, he continued. Desserts are not good for her. There is too much sugar. Orissa did not reply to him. Looking at Sean who was seated in front of her, she asked, Dr. Bailey, is sugar bad for health? Sean smiled. In the correct amounts, sugar is good for health. Too much of it is bad. Listen to the doctor. He's so professional. Marissa smiled and chided Benjamin. He doesn't like it, so he does not allow others to eat it. The waiters continued to serve their food. Marissa helped the children take the food, without missing any child. Seeing her caring only about the children, Benjamin spooned some food onto her plate for her. Mommy, don't just take care of us. You need to eat too. Gavin smiled and reminded her. Marissa smiled softly and nodded. Okay. During the meal, she made sure the 6 children each had enough to eat, and only when they had enough did she begin eating her share. Mummy, you haven't ordered dessert yet. I want dessert. The little girl tugged at Marissa's sleeve, acting in a cute manner. As soon as the waiter comes in, I will order it. Marissa said dotingly. Benjamin looked at them and said to Jesse, Boys, don't eat too much of this, it will cause tooth decay. The little girl blinked, but, Jesse, shush. Jasper motioned to his sister to keep silent. Jessie stuck out her tongue and smiled, narrowing her eyes. Marissa giggled. Benjamin was puzzled when he saw everyone smiling mysteriously. His handsome face turned solemn. What are you guys laughing about?